Dear reader, I'm Tony, and this is Book Text. It's another Friday Reads. This is my last Friday Reads of Victober, which makes me kind of sad to think that Victober has already passed and gone, basically. But first, our word of the day today is another Victorian slang term. This is actually a term that was popularized by Queen Victoria herself. It originated in Scotland, but she was a big fan of Scotland. She spent a lot of time there, read a lot of Scottish romances. So the word is collie-shangles, and it is a noun meaning argument. So I imagine that maybe Victoria herself had some collie-shangles that she had to engage in, or chose to engage in, perhaps. I thought that was kind of a fun term relating to Victoria herself. And of course, I learned a lot about her reading Lucy Worsley's Queen Victoria this month, which I highly recommend. But that was not this week, so I will not mention it further. So I have a lot of books to talk about today. First, the books that I have finished in the last week. I finished Thomas Hardy's The Woodlanders. This was the story of people living in a woodland community in England, obviously, and it kind of dealt with a lot of class issues, but mostly with relationship issues. So there's a character who gets married fairly early in the book, and maybe she married the wrong person, and there's some kind of intrigue about her husband's relationships and her own relationships, and it had some similar themes to another book that I read, and so I enjoyed kind of comparing and contrasting them. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 5 stars. Not that because it was the most amazing book I've ever read, but because it was so poetic. The imagery of a Thomas Hardy, he's famous for it, and this imagery continued in The Woodlanders. I enjoyed this very much. Felt like I was part of the scenery, right? Because it was so vividly described. There was a passage where a character is being described as Autumn's brother, which was my favorite passage of the whole book. It was such a beautiful kind of concept of being Autumn's brother. So highly enjoy this one. Recommend it to other Victorian novel fans. The similar book that I read, that I finished, was Sylvia's Lovers by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is the story of a seaside town, so a completely different setting, but similar characters inhabiting this setting in this book, and similar plot lines. So in this one also there is a character who gets married about partway through the book, and maybe married the wrong person. There was a person who was assumed to be dead who was not dead, and then there's a falling out because of this revelation. And I enjoyed this one as well. I can't remember if I gave it 4 or 5 stars. It was up there. It wasn't my favorite Elizabeth Gaskell ever. I definitely prefer Cranford and North and South to Sylvia's Lovers. It was very sad. Both Sylvia's Lovers and The Woodlanders were quite sad, especially towards the end. So you just got to keep that in mind. Kind of like a lot of Victorian novels, though. There's a lot of happy things and sad things. I thought this one was an excellent read. It made me think a lot about people and about compassion for people, sympathy for people, and not judging them, allowing people to change in their lives. I thought that was some important themes that came out in this book, but I really liked it. Of course, I also finished Shirley, but I had to return it to the library. So in Shirley, there are 2 characters who become really good friends, Shirley and Caroline, and they have similar love interests is what it kind of feels like throughout the book, but of course, spoiler alert, end up with different people, but kind of in a happy way, in a very happy ending. I loved the historicity, like the historical context of this book. I loved the characters. I loved the descriptions. Charlotte Bronte has a beautiful writing style, and I gave that one 5 stars. I will definitely be getting my own copy. It was hard to not write things in the margins and comment on things. And so I need my own copy to reread and to cherish, because I loved it more than Jane Eyre. I'll say it. I loved it more than Jane Eyre. So I definitely recommend that one to people who enjoyed Jane Eyre. All right, so I'm currently reading a couple more books. There's only 2 days left in Victober, and so I might not finish these in time. One is the audiobook for The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I got food poisoning this week, and so I wasn't able to exercise as much as I normally do during the week. So I wasn't able to listen to my audiobooks as much. So I'm still listening to the audiobook. It is very interesting. It is so similar to the 1960 film that I have mentioned in previous videos that I feel like I'm remembering a lot of the story, even though I have not read it yet. So that is what's the class kind of discussion of classes is really interesting, as he's talking about the different races that have evolved from humans in the far future. And it's really interesting to think about the haves and the have-nots in the context of science fiction. So I've been enjoying that. I'm also currently reading Scenes of Clerical Life by George Eliot. This is actually a collection of 3 novellas that are apparently related. They seem to be, at least the first 2, are related in setting. I'm reading this as a buddy read with Kate Howe and Kate from the novel Nomad, but I am a little bit behind because of my food poisoning. I spent a lot of time sleeping during the day. So now that I've recovered, I'm going to do my best to finish this by the end of Victober, but I might not make it. So this might bleed into November. But this is so the 3 novellas are about different clergymen and their communities, and how the gossip of communities kind of is damaging to developing sympathy, or as George Eliot would call it, fellow feeling for people. And it's really interesting in the context of her own issues with faith and with religion, but dealing with religious characters in a very sympathetic way is fascinating. So I have been enjoying this, even though I'm not as far as I need to be in it. It is wonderful. There was we laughed on our discussion, our buddy read discussion, because there's a whole passage and it just kept going on and on about cream, and she talks a lot directly to the reader. I imagine that you are this kind of reader. You're a town-bred reader, and you've never experienced cream directly from the cow, and it was quite funny, but there's a lot of really poignant and even sad moments in these stories, but I'm enjoying them. All right, that's what I'm currently reading. I'm trying to focus only on those 2 things so I can finish them in a reasonable amount of time, close to Victober. So I am going to, in the next week, return to several books that I was reading before Victober, and I had to kind of put aside so that I could finish my Victober reads. So I have been reading 1 poem a day, 1 essay a day, and 1 short story a day, and I plan to continue that in November. So for the short stories, I have been reading Katherine Mansfield, The Garden Party, and Other Stories. Katherine Mansfield was an American writer at the turn of the century, so late 19th century, early 20th century. And so far, I only read 1 story of hers before I had to put it aside for Victober. But I really enjoyed it. It was interesting depictions of female characters. I would definitely call her a feminist. And I'm looking forward to picking it back up and getting more into some of these stories. Then for the essays a day, I'm nearly done with Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. Interestingly enough, another book with the garden in the title, but this is a collection of womanist prose. So Alice Walker is a Black American, and she has been writing and speaking for decades. Some of these date back to the 50s. And it was, I've been like marking interesting passages. I'm learning so much, and it's helping me to kind of hopefully gain a better perspective on current Black American issues, and especially people of color issues, or women of color issues. So looking at both the feminist issues, but also the racist issues. And I was really enjoying this. I'm hopefully going to finish the last couple of essays here in the next week, actually. I'm also going to return to A Vindication of the Rights of Woman by Mary Wollstonecraft. Not a great cover to stare at, but this is, of course, basically essays from the late 18th century. And Mary Wollstonecraft, famously the mother of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, amongst other things. And I actually have a collection of 2 novels or novellas, one by Mary Wollstonecraft and one by Mary Shelley, and I'm hoping to read that soonish. I don't know if by the end of the year I'll make it, but I've been enjoying reading and just agreeing with everything that Mary Wollstonecraft says, and laughing at how she states things, but also then being sad about how relevant these issues still are over 200 years later. And so I have been enjoying this, but I will get back to it now that Victober is over, or is ending, I guess. Then, of course, I am going to return to my mystery read, which is Louise Penny's Bury Your Dead. This is the story of Inspector Gamache. So this is in the Inspector Gamache series. It takes place in Quebec City, this particular story does. And so I'm interested in seeing how it relates to Three Pines, which is where the series kind of centers, which is a smaller city in Quebec, I believe. And it's really interesting to see kind of the class issues even in more modern times in Canada. So I've been enjoying this read, and I'm hoping to get back to it within this next week and start unfolding the mystery even further. So those are kind of what I'm returning to. I had already started reading before Victober overtook my life. So things that I'm going to pick up soon. I will pick up Emily Dickinson's Envelope Poems. This will be the poetry collection. I'll read 1 poem a day. And this is just a really interesting find. I can't remember where I got this. It was at some used bookstore. And it has kind of like the image of her writing on these scraps of paper, or a lot of them were written on like envelope flaps, like you see on the front cover. And then it has, of course, the transcription for those of us who can't read her handwriting, which I haven't tried yet, so I don't know if that includes me or not. But I love Emily Dickinson, and these will be kind of short, easy to kind of get in and get out of this book, so that I can spend a lot of time reading other things as well. So I'm looking forward to enjoying more Emily Dickinson. And as far as I know, those are poems that I have not encountered in other collections of hers. Then I found this book at the library yesterday. I was returning Shirley and did not intend to pick up another book, but I just was walking through the aisles for nostalgia's sake and happened upon this book accidentally. The title on the spine really drew me in. It is Decorating a Room of One's Own by Susan Harlan. And this seems to be house tours of literary houses, or in other words, houses in classic literature, and kind of looking at the style of the home, the aesthetic, the pieces that are in the home, so artwork or design choices, coloring, the arrangement of furniture in the home. And I've kind of read a little bit already, and it was funny. It was about Pemberley and Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, and it was talking about kind of why they have decorated their home how they have, and then there's advice on how to decorate your own home and how to love your home as much as somebody, so-and-so loves their home. And I think it's just kind of a fun way to think about literature. In particular, it's making me think about how homes in literature represent characters, because where you live is an outer expression of who you are on the inside, and how you live is an expression of how you think and how you kind of interact with the world. And so it's really making me think now about homes in literature and how they can represent, metaphors of characters. And so I'm looking forward to reading more about homes in literature. Then the second to last one is The Dead Secret by Wilkie Collins. So this was actually on my Victober TBR, and I obviously did not get to it because I was overly ambitious. I did pretty well in my Victober follow-up. I'll kind of share my thoughts on how Victober went for me. But The Dead Secret is a sensational novel, meaning that, or I keep saying sensational, it's a sensation novel, which was a popular genre during the Victorian era, where things that are sensational happen. So it was about kind of shocking you and lots of twists and scandals and that kind of thing to keep you reading, keep you interested. And so I've heard Kate Howe compare it to modern day thrillers, and I think that's a really interesting way to think about it. I have actually not read a Wilkie Collins novel. I've read a short story and maybe a novella by Wilkie Collins. So I'm interested in seeing kind of what the sensation novel is all about. And this is actually a group read on Instagram. The hashtag is Victorian Sensation Book Club. So it appears that they read maybe one a month. And it's hosted by Silver Linings and Pages and Read Right to Janice on Instagram. So I'll link to them in the description box. But I'm looking forward to continuing the Victorian literature spirit throughout the year with them. The last book that I'm hoping to pick up soon is an audiobook. It is by Lucy Worsley, called Jane Austen at Home. I heard a lot of people talking about this during Jane Austen July earlier this year, and I didn't get around to it. But because I've listened to Lucy Worsley's Queen Victoria nonfiction, I thought this would be a really interesting next step to take. So I guess I'm also continuing the Jane Austen July spirit throughout the year by listening to this nonfiction audiobook. But at any rate, I'm excited to keep reading Lucy Worsley's works. So what are you currently reading? How did your week go? I hope you did not get food poisoning. It was an unpleasant night all night long, but I am much better now. So tell me what's going on with your reading. Have you read any of these books? And remember, there's always another book.